guy falls backwards over on his chair and breaks his neck and dies. One of the son's wife gives birth. She died. Everybody's dying. She dies. The son is named Ichabod. Every time I read that, I think, well, the one thing I think about, the headless horseman. Yeah. So anyway, the title of the class is The Power Behind the Throne, for the operator back there. Power behind the throne. Got it. And then, the ark is taken to the Philistines, and then bad things start happening to them. The first city, they get diseases and people start dying, and they get terrified, and they send it to the next city, and the same thing happens, and they send it to the next city and say, no, we don't want it. And so the rulers of the Philistines get together, and what should we do? Ask their priests. They make rats and golden rats and something else, and put it on an ox cart and send it back. And if it goes straight back to Israel, it's from their God. If it doesn't and just wanders around, then it was just something that happened. And of course, it goes straight back to Israel. And by the time he gets back there, the people that find it are very excited about it. They take it off the cart, and then of course, again, what do? Well, about 70 of them look into the Ark of the Covenant, and so now you know where Raiders of the Lost Ark got their thing from. They opened up the box, and 70 people died. So there's some of the events that were happening in this period of time. Now, Samuel has now become a judge in the process of this. He is from from the Ephraimite tribe, one of Joseph's sons. And let me see, make sure I get everything here. There is one more threat, which really just prompts everything that happens now. And that's on the east side of the Jordan River. There's a fellow named Nahash. He is moving up from south to north. He's an Ammonite. He is conquering little towns and cities, and he basically, when he conquers them, he gives them an ultimatum, and one is die or have your right eye plucked out. Violent times. Okay. Nothing in this story sounds very appetizing as far as, this is going to encourage us to do something, right? And it's pretty violent and bloody and all of that. So that's where we sit with what's going on here. Samuel has grown up. This takes place over a rather lengthy period of time, because we find out that by the time Nahash is coming and we get to chapter 7, Samuel's an old guy. And guess what? He has 2 sons. And guess what? They're scoundrels. So now we have, it's kind of interesting when we're going to look at David. And David doesn't do much better as a father. Now, we look at Saul, and while Saul had disagreements with Jonathan, they all die together. And again, more death. They all die together. So there's all these, I talk with my hands, by the way, if anybody hadn't noticed. I'm going to try to keep them down somewhere. So everybody's all upset. The people are upset because they've just spent 300 to 400 years of judges being delivered by God. And they're kind of tired of it. Things don't seem to be steady or consistent or helpful. And there's reasons for that. You go back and read the Judges, and you read other places as well. Some of the prophets, some of the prophets in the historical accounts. So they're not too happy here. So in chapter 7, and beginning in verse 2, the last part of that verse, then all the people of Israel turned back to the Lord. Typical of the roller coaster ride through the Judges. And Samuel said to all of the Israelites, If you are returning to the Lord with all your hearts, then rid yourselves of all the foreign gods, the Ashtaroths, and commit yourselves to the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. And so they did that. They put away the Baals and the Ashtaroths and served the Lord only. And then in verse 5, assemble all Israel at Mizpah, Samuel said, and I will intercede with the Lord for you. And so that's what happens. Now this seems to be a good idea. Samuel intercedes. He's interceding for the people. And that's something we're going to have to keep in mind.
George, where are you reading from again?
Chapter 7, I'm sorry. Chapter 7, verse 5, verse 6.
Of?
1 Samuel.
Okay, thank you.
Anyway. So 6, when they had assembled, drew water, poured out before the Lord, they fasted, they confessed, we have sinned against the Lord. And so Samuel was a leader or a judge, would be a better term. Samuel was a judge of Israel at Mizpah. And Samuel was a circuit rider. Remember the old days of the preachers who used to circuit? Well, he was a circuit rider. He had 4 cities he went to. He had his hometown, and then he made a kind of a strange loop. Most of it was sort of central west, but there was one town to the east, and it was in the middle of Israel. So he never went to Jerusalem, but he never went much further north than where he was in that area. He made that loop around once a year and came home. Then in verse 7, the Philistines attacked again, and the Israelites heard of it. They were afraid, and they said to Samuel, do not stop crying out to the Lord our God for us, that he may rescue us from the hand of the Philistines. Verse 9 of chapter 7, Samuel took a suckling lamb and sacrificed it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. He cried out to the Lord on Israel's behalf, and the Lord answered him. Now, that's kind of an interesting thing there. Samuel does what a priest does. Why? And you look at that and you read that, and there's some other things that are going to happen down the road. So, what was going on here? Well, there's a thing in Israel called high places. And people went to these different high places and offered sacrifices. And sometimes it says in the text, to the Lord. So apparently, whether there were priests there or not, people were offering up sacrifices. And we think, well, the only thing the priests can do are the only ones who can offer sacrifices are the priests. And it ends up in Jerusalem and all that. But apparently, it was a lot more prevalent. Whether it was good or not is another story, but it was a lot more prevalent as to what was going on. And so Samuel has cried out again to God, and then while he was sacrificing, the Lord thundered a loud thunder against the Philistines. They were thrown into a panic. The men of Israel rushed out and won the battle. Then Samuel took a stone and raised it up, and of course, Ebenezer, stone of help. And so another song comes to mind, where that here I raised my Ebenezer. So you get this stone of help, this idea here of what Samuel's doing. So far, things look good. Samuel's interceding for the people. God is answering. The people have repented. And then he talks about his circuit in verses 15 and following, from Bethel to Gilgal to Mizpah, and then back to Ramah, which was his hometown. Everything seems to be going well, and everybody seems to be happy. Water in their mouth. But that's not the case. Now, of course, we know that never happens in modern life. Everybody gets happy and are just fine and nobody complains, right? We're looking at stuff that's going on behind the throne. We talk about intrigue. every 4 years, books come out about what happened in the White House, and some could be positive and some negative, and everybody, oh yeah, and off we go, and all these discussions, and or something happens in Hollywood, and oh, we got to write a book about it, or we got to report it, and we come out with all the, and of course, if you just go to the, do you go to stores anymore to buy papers? What happened to the National Enquirer? I guess you go online now and find all this stuff, juicy stuff that people used to. I mean, I missed the headlines walking by, and somebody was kidnapped by a space alien or something like that. Anyway, so it says in chapter 8, verse 1, Samuel grew old, and then mentions his sons, but his sons did not follow in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain, accepted bribes, perverted justice. So they were no good. And so the elders of Israel come in verse 4, and they talk to Samuel, and they say, you are old, your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have. And we made a big deal out of that. Oh, they wanted a king, like everybody else, and we don't want it, and we talk about how that can be all kinds of problems, though there are other things that we could talk about in that light from Genesis and Deuteronomy. We'll get to some of that. But when they said that to Samuel, give us a king to lead us, this, and lead or judge us, same word, judge, this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord. And it's kind of interesting. Samuel was not happy. They've rejected Samuel. And he's an old guy. And old guys can be mean.
Amen.
Oh, hey. Let's not get personal here. Anyway, and you do not have the right to speak to my family at all. So verse 7, the Lord tells Samuel, listen to all that the people are saying. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. And he goes on to talk about, as the day I brought them from Egypt until today, forsaking me, serving other gods. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly, and let them know what a king who will reign over them will claim as his rights. And so we have this, you read the text, and we don't have the reactions. We don't have the emotions involved in this. And so we don't have the voice inflection. We just kind of read it, and we don't know what to do with it, because we don't know if Samuel was disappointed or mad or angry that they had rejected him, how would he respond to the people? And when you're reading this, verse 11, this is what the king who will reign over you. It's not, hey, guess what the king's going to do when he reigns over you? Because God said you can have a king. Well, that's one way to read it, but that may not be the best way to read it. He may be very angry at doing this. And that's going to affect things down the road. Remember, Samuel's not happy that he's been rejected. Do you think he's going to be happy that he has to go find a king? And that's going to affect things in relationships between Samuel and Saul and the people. And it's kind of interesting how some of that pops up. So in verse 11, this is what a king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. And he goes through, he'll make his sons soldiers, and there'll be chariots and horses, and commanders of thousands, commanders of 50. I mean, he's going to really expand. It's really not a great expanse, but he's expanding on, I'm going to make this look as bad as I can. Weapons of war and equipment for chariots, and your daughters will become perfumers and cooks and bakers. And he's going to field this massive army. There'll be horses involved. your male and female servants, the best of your cattle and donkeys, he will take for his own use. And of course he will, because he's king. At least that's what the other people do in different nations. But the people in verse 19 refused to listen to Samuel. We want a king over us, then we would be like the nations. The king who leads us and goes out before us and fight our battles. So they're happy to have a king lead them out and a standing army. They're happy to have this army, that they don't have to worry about being invaded anymore. At least that's how they perceived it. There were most of this time was more of a city-state situation. There were nations, but most of the time it was the towns and that they were, of course, would conquer and things like that. But it's changing. Nations are going to become nations. They're going to be more united, and of course we'll get into some of the other things later on. David is conquering people all over the place, and he's not conquering cities, he's conquering nations. He's putting everyone under his power. But in Deuteronomy chapter 17, chapter 17, here's Moses speaking. When you enter the land the Lord your God has given you and take possession of it and settle in it, you will say, let us have a king over us like all the nations around us. I wonder if the people were reading that. I wonder if they thought, hey, Moses said, so maybe we need to follow Moses. Be sure to appoint over you a king the Lord your God chooses, the one God chooses. Now we can say, well, God chose Saul, and he did. Maybe. Or maybe it was the people who were more wanting a certain type of king. But anyway, and again, we'll see a difference between Saul and David, which we already know. Do not place a foreigner over you, one who's not an Israelite. The king, moreover, must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself, or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them. You are not to go back that way again. He must not take many wives. His heart will be led astray if he does. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver. Does this sound like anybody we know? Someone named Solomon? Solomon did all this stuff. And I realize God has blessed Solomon. He said he would bless him. But this is what Moses was warning about. When he takes the throne of his kingdom, he is to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law, taken from that of the Levitical priest. It is to be with him, and he is to read it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God and follow carefully all the words of this law and its decrees, and not to consider himself better than his fellow Israelites, and turn from the law to the right or to the left. Then he and his descendants will reign a long time over the kingdom of Israel. So a warning that quickly got violated when we start with the kings. And we know that because, quite frankly, it really wasn't a good idea to reject God. And the northern, getting way ahead of ourselves here, the northern kings, when the nation split, northern kings were just rotten. No good king. And the southern kings had their own issues. Some were good, some weren't. Even when we look at David, Solomon, and others, we know they were not perfect in any sense of the word. So Samuel in we're back in 1 Samuel 8, verse 21. When Samuel heard all that the people said, he repeated it before the Lord, and the Lord answered, listen to them and give them a king. So, second time he says that. Second time. Go ahead.
I know we don't really have an answer to this, but I wonder, as I read this, it says the people did this. Was it really 100%? Everybody was in agreement? I just wonder about that.
No, probably not. It depends on, but it's hard to say, because I can understand the fear that they had with the situation around them. And what were the Levites who were instructed to teach the law, what were they thinking? And we don't have any indication of that. Apparently, they've been kind of pushed to the side, because they were the ones that were not involved in the sacrifices. Well, Eli was a Levite, but obviously we saw what happened there. So, what happened to the teaching of the law? And reading Deuteronomy, he said, write this law down. Did Samuel encourage that? Did he go back and say, okay, we've got to write this down? So it seems like there's all kinds of, yeah, we're going to do this, but we're not thinking about, well, what God told us or what Moses told us or anything. And again, here's the second time he says this, listen to them. Is Samuel kind of him-hawing around? If that's a good word to use. Is he kind of saying, I really don't want to do this? I mean, he's rejected. And so he's not running out there and saying, I got to go get a king. He's kind of saying, Lord, did you hear what they said? And now the question comes, who's Samuel going to be mad at? Well, he's mad at the people. Well, is he happy with God? That God is siding with the people? Do what they say? What about me? What about me? Now I know we never do that either, do we? Sorry to be sarcastic, but I have literally heard people who complained about and not here, but other places, they complain about the youth had so much attention paid to them, and some old guy would say, well, what about me? What about you? You have things going on. You're not alone. What's going on here? And the little humility would be more helpful. And so I think Samuel's really struggling here with, okay, God wants this, but I don't want it. Is this and maybe Samuel's thinking, and you can come up with any number of things, I really do know what's better. And have we ever thought about that? We have plenty of examples, right? Sarah knew it was better, or did she, with Hagar? Samuel here, he may think he knows what's better. Other people may have thought, well, if they know better, we can probably find a few examples. And in the end, it didn't work out the way we thought it would. And go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, to me, it's just more of the idea that people won't see and can't see God's long-term plan. Because it all works together, just not on our calendar.
Right.
It's not our schedule. And sometimes things go south before they turn back the other way.
Yeah.
And we're in the middle of everything at the moment right now. And it looks terrible to us.
Right.
But further out, it's better.
Yeah, we're very impatient. People are impatient.
A little bit, yeah.
No, not a little bit.
I was going to say, what Samuel is saying is what God told him to tell them. And they still didn't want to hear it. And what more
right.
can you know? How assured can you be of what will be,
Yeah,
except what God is telling you? And
Yeah.
you still ignore it.
yeah. And maybe Samuel
We
didn't
don't
want to hear
want
it
that.
either. You can always think about Samuel though, and again, we're looking more of an individual thing here.
Mhm.
Samuel didn't like it.
No.
He didn't like being rejected. So, yeah, how many times we read something, this is what God said, but I don't like that. I don't like that at all.
But is that what he meant?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
What
Is
it
that-
really meant was.
Yeah, is that what he meant us to be? I think if you have a life group, we're talking about contentment in our life group and tonight. Yeah, but I don't want to be content. I really want to complain. I want to, and we can find things, and we can be negative, and we can, and again, get ahead of ourselves, or we're in this, nobody understands what I'm going through. Well, maybe because you're not looking around to find people who understand what you're going through. So there's all kinds of struggles going on there. So it's twice that God says here, listen to the people. And if you're Samuel, is that really what you want to hear? Listen to the people who rejected you? Come on, Lord, that's not what I want to do. And so you think about congregational thing. You want us to listen to the preacher who rejected my idea? Or the elders or whoever? You want me to listen to them? No, I'm not going to listen to them. I'm going to and go on about it. Now, you listen to me. And I've been at the receiving end of that type of thing. And so, yeah, we'll fix the preacher. We'll just let everybody know we don't like him, but we'll do it in a different way, And so there's all kinds of things that can happen. I don't want to listen to what God says. I don't want to listen to the people who rejected me. But he has to deal with that. So that's where we get to chapter 8. And then so in chapter 9, we're introduced a little bit to Saul's family. And he is a Benjaminite, if I can say that. Benjamin has some interesting things. 2 different times we find out that Benjamin had a lot of left-handed people. Yes. They could throw the slings and other things they could do with the left hand. So that, they were a small tribe. In fact, in the text here it says we're the smallest of tribes. They tended to float between Judah and the northern tribes. It's not as cut and dry as we like to make it, because Judah is made up of, in the middle of Judah was Simeon. Simeon, for some reason, was in that, just placed in that territory because there was no place else to put him. And apparently they just kind of faded into oblivion in that process. So when you read through the historical accounts, you come across Benjamin, again, sometimes with the 10 tribes to the north and sometimes with Judah. And we're back and forth. And so they kind of border tribe, best way to say it. And so we don't always know where they are. And what famous New Testament person was in Benjamin? Really famous one. Well known.
Paul?
Huh?
It was just a guess, but may be wrong.
I didn't hear it. I'm sorry.
Was it Paul?
Oh, Paul, yeah. Paul was a Benjaminite. So if I said he's got the same name and roll letters, you would have got it right away. So anyway, yeah, he was a Benjaminite. I don't know if he's left-handed, but he was a Benjaminite. Kind of, again, interesting in that sense. So they go through this little story here, introducing us to Saul. He's out looking for donkeys, can't find them. They go to they said there's a seer. Let's go see the seer, which is a prophet. So that the words are changing at this time. What used to be a seer now becomes a prophet. And let me get to the text I really want to be at. In verse 15. So 9:15. 1 Samuel 9:15. Now the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed to Samuel, about this time tomorrow I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him ruler over my people Israel. He will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. I have looked on my people, for their cry has reached me. So even though the people rejected God as king, God still looked on them. So God is merciful. And it goes back to maybe some of the things we read in Exodus, for instance, or Numbers. they built an idol, the calf, golden calf, and God's ready to just, wipe them off. But Moses intercedes, and God says, okay, I'll go with you, I'll forgive them, and so forth. And he does that, and numbering the 12 spies and the situation around that. And again, Moses intercedes, and God said, okay. And you look at the judges, the period of the judges, they reject God, they worship idols, and they cry out for the Lord to come and deliver them, and he sends a judge to come and deliver them. So we see God's mercy in all this. And again, it's one more time we see God's mercy. He's not going to forsake these people yet. He's not going to say, and I say yet, and yet, even that's kind of has to be conditioned to realize he didn't really reject them in totality. So there's all this going on in the history of Israel. And so we look at this and see, God said, this is, their cry has reached me. So Samuel caught sight of Saul, and he said, this is the man I spoke to you about. He will govern my people. Verse 17. And then verse 19, they introduce each other. I am the seer. Samuel replied to Saul, go up ahead of me to the high place. There's that high place. Now, here's a question. Was Samuel waiting for God to choose the king? Or was he just kind of slow in choosing the king? Does God say, choose a king, go get a king, or give them a king? In chapter 8, verse 21. And now God comes and said, here's the king. Well, what's Samuel been doing?
Procrastinating.
Huh?
Procrastinating.
Procrastinating. We meet people who don't want to do something. Do they really just run out and do it?
It would be interesting to know how much time left happened there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was possible.
Was this, and that's the part of the problem, is that these things are compacted so much that we just assume it's one right after the other, and there may have been months involved, or and Samuel dragging his feet. He doesn't really want to do this, and so if you're looking at it that way, you might see a time frame, a longer time frame. If you're looking at Samuel goes out there and does it, well, you're going to look at a shorter time frame. So, but who's delaying? And it's kind of interesting that this is just kind of making all this. Who's Samuel mad at? Again, is he mad at the people? Yes. Is he mad at God? Is he mad at choosing a king? Now God's chosen a king. How does he feel about Saul? Saul is, I didn't say this, in chapter 9, verse 1, we find out Saul's family is rich. A man of standing, or the man of wealth, was his father. So Saul is rich, and he's tall. Real tall. They were talking this week a little bit about women and men relationships, and asking women, would you marry a guy who is shorter than you, or about your height, or do you want somebody really tall? And of course, the one guy who was talking about it, his wife said, my wife's 5'2", and I'm 6. She said, I wouldn't even consider you if you were my height. Interesting anyway. So there's I don't have to go on that, but anyway. So there's that choices that people have to consider, and here's Saul, a tall guy and handsome, and well, he's going to make a good king. I wonder how good of a speaker he was. We're moved by good speaking. Because I've heard some preachers who people tell me, oh, you gotta go hear this guy. He's a wonderful speaker. You'll just fall in love with him. He doesn't say anything, but he, certainly was an elegant speaker. But I've heard dull ones who are low key, monotone, and I got more out of them. I didn't fall asleep, so there are different ways to look at it, and most of the time it's what's being presented and said, not how well it's being said. I mean, we're looking for people who say things well. You're looking at the wrong guy here, because I stumble through everything. Oh, stop it. And do all that. It's not. We tend to look on surface types of ideas, and that becomes a problem.
As I say, exactly that. We fixate on the surface, and we still elect leaders who are, dynamic but empty, or they're good looking but they're corrupt, or whatever. We rarely look at the individual. We're more concerned with the external, and we're not the first ones to do it.
Yeah.
We don't look for substance.
Yeah.
All right, so we asked that. They're at the high place. Go up to the high place. I mentioned that earlier. As for the donkeys, you lost 3 days ago. They were found. It's interesting. 3 pops up in here a number of times. We'll talk about that. 27. So they get together. They have a meal. This is from chapter 9, from about verse 21 and on. And then in 27, as they were going down to the edge of the town, Samuel said to Saul, "Tell the servants to go on ahead of us." And the servants did so. "But you stay here for a while, so that I may give you a message from God." Okay, that sounds good. Except, and chapter 10 is where the message is. And so the question is this a message from God? Because Samuel said it. Is it a message that Samuel wants to bring because he's procrastinating again and kind of wants things to slow down? And so he says in verse 1 of chapter 10, "Has not the Lord anointed you ruler over his inheritance?" Okay. "When you leave me today, you will meet 2 men near Rachel's tomb on the border of Benjamin. And they'll tell you about the donkeys." Okay. That sounds good. But then he says, "Then you will go from there until you reach the great tree of Tabor. 3 men going up to worship God at Bethel will meet you there. One will be carrying 3 young goats, 3 loaves of bread, another a skin of wine. You will accept from them the 2 loaves of bread." What's going on here? There's more. "And after that, you will go to Gibeah of God, where there is a Philistine outpost. As you approach the town, you'll meet a procession of prophets coming down from the high places, and they have their instruments. The Spirit of the Lord will come powerfully upon you. You will prophesy." Go down, and then so he's got all that. He's got those 3 things. Again, this could be from God. We'll just accept it as from God because of the way it's designed. But then he says in verse 8, "Go down ahead of me to Gilgal. I will surely come down to you to sacrifice burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. But you must wait 7 days until I come to you and tell you what you are to do." So he's got 3 things, and maybe God designed that Saul will do these 3 things to show that he's going to be king. And so I can see God saying this, and then they're doing that. It's that last thing. Go down ahead of me to Gilgal. Okay. Wait there 7 days. And what's going on at Gilgal and what happens there. Now for a commercial break. Well, it's one of those, the stomach churns from Carol Burnett's show, something's going on here. Is that from God? Or is Samuel delaying again the inevitable Saul will be king? And so there's this struggle going on. I think Samuel is really struggling with the situation.
And I know he must be feeling some rejection, but if he truly believes that having a king will harm the people, he's hurting. He doesn't want that for them, right? He doesn't want
I agree, yeah.
all the trouble that's coming. Maybe he's thinking God will intervene and change things up in the meantime.
That's a good point.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's what this class is about, talking about these different things, different ways to look at it. Because we don't have all the information, we aren't there. It's a limited amount of what they're telling us, just so that we trust God. But there's a human factor in there. And again, if Samuel thinks it's gonna hurt, he's trying to delay, and you're right, and what's God gonna do in all of this? Because if they've rejected God, we kind of get a glimpse, again, going back to Moses. God gets angry at the people, and Moses had to intercede, and it happened twice. And so there's that, is there going to be somebody to intercede? And that's another question then. We already know Samuel interceded one time for the people. But have you noticed that there's not been an intercession since? He's not stepped in and said, Lord, I know what these people are doing, and having a little discussion with God. Why not? And so that's another question to be raised as we look through this. This is just things, how is Samuel looking at this whole situation? He's seeing the destruction, but he for some reason doesn't want it. Is the rejection so bad in his mind that he can't even intercede for the people? And I think, we become that way sometimes if we're not careful. I am so angry at this person, I cannot even intercede for them. Or I am disappointed to such an extent that I want to say nothing to God about it. That's when we should be out there saying something to God and asking God to help us through that. So go down, as Saul turned to leave, Samuel, God changed Samuel's heart, so we know he prophesied everything that the donkeys are found and so forth and so on. Verse 17 of chapter 10, Samuel summoned the people of Israel to the Lord at Mizpah, said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel says, I brought you out of Egypt, and I deliver you from the power of Egypt and all the kingdoms that oppressed you. But you have now rejected your God, who saved you out of all your disasters and calamities." And this may go to answer your question about why. But you have now rejected your God, who saved you out of all the disasters and calamities. And you have said, "No, appoint a king over us. So now present yourself before the Lord by your tribe and clans." And he's going to choose Saul out of that. Saul was hiding among the supplies, which kind of gives you one of two things. He was very humble or very shy. I can relate more to the second one. I was a humble preacher. Well, but I preached humble. So anyway, people shout along with the king. You have to wonder how Samuel thought about that. So that's up through the chapter 10 there. Anybody want to make any comments or questions about anything?
I got a comment.
Go ahead.
So, the point you make about Saul deciding, or wondering why God would want to bless the people.
Samuel?
Yeah, Samuel, when the people in his mind needed to be corrected, you know. I think that relates to real life.
Mhm.
You know, I find myself at times when people do me wrong, you know, and it's hard to want to bless them
Mhm.
still, you know, the proverbial turn of the cheek, you know, that's really hard to do, and it happens sometimes, you know, in my family where, you know, people have attitudes and based on how much of that you get, it's really easy to say, okay, I'm done, you know, I don't wanna, you know, deal with any of that, and because you're so wrong, you know what I mean? But the idea of Samuel was he could make that argument, but yet God still wanted him to minister to the people, you know, and so that's I think that's a real nugget there for people like me.
Okay. Any others? It's a struggle with, this is life. I mean, you know, I know we're talking about kings and prophets, but if you think about it, they're people.
Mhm.
And we forget sometimes that they're not special. Okay. They're really not that special. You know, you're not as important as you think you are.
You know, we think that what we're going through today is so different and unique, but it's the same thing over and over again. Do we want a prophet? Do we want a king? Do we want, you know, we're always wanting something different because life would be easier, the grass would be greener on the other side. You know, if I had this, then I would make good choices.
Yeah.
So many lessons to be learned, and we just don't learn that.
I always like Irma Bombeck's saying, the grass is always greener over the septic tank. Right?
That is true.
My brother, when we have discussions, he said, you have to remember, we're dealing with human beings.
Yeah.
And always, human beings are going to be human beings.
And we is one.
And that's kind of his word, I is one.
So, you know, that's part of our problem too. Sadly, we can see ourselves in some of this, and it's embarrassing to look at that. Just some, because we're not going to spend a lot of time in chapter 11, but this is where we're introduced to Nahash, the Ammonite, and kind of tells what he was doing, and that's why they're getting all the king was coming together for it. We'll talk about that a little more next week. But it's kind of interesting that this little section, if you have a newer translation, this little section of chapter 11 was found in the older translations, just a brief thing, and people scratched their heads saying, not quite sure I understand that. And then the Dead Sea Scrolls was found, and they found this little few extra words in there that have now been added to many of the newer translations to explain what's going on in Nahash. So somewhere along the line, somebody missed something, and that's not hard to understand because Nahash is mentioned in verse 1 and verse 2. So somebody may have just said, "Oh, I wrote that down," and went on, and it just kind of kept going. So anyway. It was an interesting discovery that everybody was really excited about 20 years ago, and it just helps explain a little more of the text that's going on there. And then one other verse about Nahash, just because we're talking about him, chapter 12, verse 12, when you saw that Nahash, king of the Ammonites, was moving against you, you said to me, no, we want a king to rule over us. So they recognized where the problem was. It was this guy coming on the other side of the Jordan River. They were terrified. And so this was their solution. This was their solution. Rather than trusting God, here's how we're going to here's how we want to handle it. And this led to all that. So next week we'll pick up a little bit in 11, carry 12. Look at two speeches, not next week, the following week. Two speeches of Samuel, two interactions of Samuel and Saul, and some of the things going on there. Next week there's a special class, and so I'm assuming we're all meeting probably in the bigger classroom, And then following, we'll pick up on this and look a little more at Samuel, and then we're going to look at Saul and David's relationship, and then we're going to look at David and the intrigue that goes around him. Much as we all like David, he had some interesting things happening in his life.
George, I was thinking about what Chris said just now, and Catherine as well, about we're actually going to do the same things over and over, again, it's not new. But I often think about there are times we forget that we have something that we very often don't take full advantage of as the members of the church, because God has placed us in a wonderful community. So if you seek out and align yourselves with people who try to please the Lord, and when you get into these different conflicting situations or whatever it is, weaknesses of the spirit and stuff like that, if you have sought out people who try to please the Lord, and then you can talk to them and they can speak to you as oracles of God. So you're not by yourself. You have people who can support you as you try to do better and who correct you and stuff like that, because they're speaking as the oracle of God. We've always had that width. We just don't really take full advantage sometimes of that. We want to lead to people who may think like we think about doing the wrong thing sometimes, excusing our poor behavior. We forget what God has given us. People who are there speaking as He would speak, and you would go to them for support. And so you're not, adrift,
Right.
trying to make these strange decisions by yourself.
Yeah, and again, as I said at the beginning of the class, it's how you read the text. So if you're walking, you can read it as Samuel very positively, looking for good things, and you can read it negatively, sort of the way I'm doing it, because I like to be negative, and reading the text in a little more negative way and seeing some of the bad things, or you can, but you can do both, and then look to see what you can draw out of it. And you can do that with any text. You can, even Psalm 23, you look at it, well, this is a great text, but there's some interesting things in there. You can make some arguments about some things. So anyway, so that's how we're looking at it. But thank you for your comments. Everybody, great comments. Thank you very much. We'll pick up next week. Thank you. 2 weeks.